Hello, guys. My name is Carl Bianconi. I'm going to be talking about two things today. The first one would be what is going on with Hillary Hunt and Royal Mail. So, Royal Mail is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, postal services still on its feet and has been innovating throughout the centuries until this day. The British government in 2006 removed Royal Mail's monopoly status by allowing private companies to compete in the market. Thanks to this, Royal Mail was able to free itself from the government issued regulations and rates. Being freed from these regulations, they are now able to set their own postal rates or prices. Since Royal Mail changed from being a public company to a private ownership, it has changed its policies from government based to market oriented. Also, some of the changes Royal Mail faced included significant restructuring of government regulations, competitive entry into long-standing monopoly position, deep forces cut, wide-scale labor negotiations, and strikes. Also, after the privatization, Hillary Hunt had some meetings with the members of the board to evaluate the cost of capital of the company. Also, in these meetings, they talked about how investors would play a part into the company's needs, since Royal Mail was not a government owned, since it was not government owned anymore. Also, Hunt and the board discussed how shifting their policies would benefit the company and bring more profit in. Apart from these points, there was a huge British regulator authority called Ofcom, or Office of Communications, conducting deep reviews of the company itself. Also, there was a couple things that Royal Mail needed to modernize quickly, which were mentioned by the National Audit Office, which are urgently needed commercial confidence, capital, and corporate experience to modernize quickly and effectively. Thank you. The second thing I'm going to be talking about is what is the cost of capital and why is it important to estimate a firm's cost of capital? What is meant by the term weighted average cost of capital, and is it set by investors or by managers? So, in simple words, cost of capital can be considered as a percentage that determines the minimum required return necessary by company in order to accept or reject a project. It could also be considered as the amount of money gained from a specific investment. It is important to estimate the cost of capital because this tool is used um, to make better decisions in the future on where to move the money and where to invest it. The cost of capital aids businesses and investors in evaluating all investment opportunities. It does so by turning future cash flows into present value by keeping it discounted. Now, the weighted average cost of capital, or WACC, is a calculation tool used to calculate a firm's cost of capital in which every type of capital is equally weighted. Investors deem this tool as important because they can easily see how much a company pays for every dollar it finances. Also, the investors are the ones that set the WACC, and it is essential for them to decide if they want to invest on the company or not.
Well, hello class. How are you doing? Now I'm gonna follow up with our presentation. But before talking about our calculation of the cost of capital, I'm gonna readdress the statement said before by my teammate, explaining that the cost of capital is a very useful tool for any company in order to decide whether they are gonna accept or they're gonna reject a new project, depending on how profitable this is gonna be. So it's a great tool that allows managers to decide whether to accept or not a new project based on the numbers, on the needs of the company. So in order to explain you this, I'm going to talk about the cost of capital and its components. So we have five different components when it comes to the cost of capital, which are the cost of debt, the tax rate, the weight of debt, the cost of equity, and the weight of equity. These all are going to have a large impact on the total calculation for the cost of capital, and will most likely either decide the needs of the company, and this will have a larger impact on our percentage. So first of all, we have our cost of debt. It represents the cost of debt, and a good measure of this is a market-based cost of debt is the yield to maturity on the bonds issued by the company that is required by the investors. This one, I believe, was the one used by Brooks, which is different from ours, because another type of cost of debt is the one obtained by estimating it from the average yield provided by bonds on the same credit rating. So in our calculation, we decided to average these two and combine them so we could have an average cost of debt for the company, for your company. So our percentage was 3.71%, and this will be added to our calculation. Next, we can find the tax rate. It is very important to use an accurate tax rate, which should be also utilized by similar corporations inside the industry. So in the case of Royal Mail Company, we have a 20% tax rate that will be used later. Then we have the weight of debt. So this, I would say, was the main difference between Brooks and our calculations. So what happened is that whenever you're calculating the weight of the debt or equity inside any company, you are gonna have the non-current, the current liabilities, plus the equity value of the company. So if you decide to use the book value of debt and the market value of debt, it's pretty similar, so you should not get confused about that. But if you're gonna use the book value of equity and the market value of equity, it's completely different, and it could change the weight of debt and the weight of the equity inside a company. So I believe this is what made the real difference between our calculations and Brooks, because we decided to go with the market value of equity, which is represented by the time of the share times the shares outstanding in the market. And that gave us a whole different number from Brooks, which resulted in a difference in the weight of debt. And our weight of debt inside the company for Royal Mail is about 14%, 14.235%. So that's the main difference, I'd say, between our calculations and Brooks, which could lead on a major change then in the total result of the cost of capital. So after, the fourth component that we can find inside our calculation for the cost of capital is the cost of equity. Well, we've learned over the years that we can do this by using the capital asset pricing model, which involves the risk-free rate, the beta of the company, which indicates how risky a company is, and the market risk premium. So for our calculations, we used a 1.511% of the risk-free beta given by the case study. The beta for Royal Mail is about 0.65, which is similar to their competitors, I'd say average, so it's not a risky firm overall, and a market risk premium of 5.8, which would give us a total cost of equity of 5.32%, which we will add that later to our formula in total. And lastly, we find the weight of equity, which is going to be the other percentage compared to the weight of debt. So as I explained you before, we did the market value of equity divided, which is going to be added to the total book value of the debt. And if we do the math, which is equity divided in equity plus debt, that would give us a weight of equity of 85%. So now if we plug all of this into our big formula for the cost of capital calculation by using the weighted average cost of capital, we will have our cost of capital resulting in a 4.98%. This is different than Brooks results and indicates that our percentage of return is slightly higher than the one obtained by Brooks. Brooks' cost of capital obtained is a 3.82%, which indicates that according to her calculations, the return required by the Royal Mail Company in order to accept a project is lower than ours, which could be very risky for the firm because they could go inside new projects and explore new projects which are gonna give them less returns, and it's gonna be not gonna be profitable or good enough for the money, for the opportunity cost and everything. So it's very important to get these results accurate in an accurate way, so a company understands their needs based on their weight of debt, weight of equity, their market capitalization, everything. It puts into consideration everything. So our difference can be explained mainly because we did use different book value of equity compared to the market value of equity compared with Brooks. So that could be one of the major difference between our calculations or hers and his. And the other thing is that we use the capital asset pricing model. So that could be one of the major difference between our calculations or hers and his. And the other thing is that we use the capital asset pricing model for our calculations, while he decided to use another calculation, which of course resulted in different numbers, and at the end that had a large impact in our calculations compared to his. And we believe that these two factors were the most influential factors in changing considerably our results compared to Brooks for the cost of capital for Royal Mail. So yeah, have a good one.
Hi everyone, my name is Sebastian Barroso and I'm going to talk about questions 4 and 5 in our case study of Royal Mail. The first thing we're going to mention in our 4 questions are the different estimates for the other comparable firms and their WACC. Since the calculations made for the weighted average cost of capital for Royal Mail were wrong, there's no reason to believe that the other companies had mistakes too, so we made all the calculations again, and these are the values that we obtained. For National Grid, they had a value of 4.11%. For Severn Trent, they had a value of 5.092%. For Tesco, it was a value of 5.44%. And for United Utilities, it was a value of 4.23%. Finally, for Vodafone, it was a value of 5.48%. As we can see, Royal Mail didn't perform too bad. It was really average compared to the rest of the companies. Just 2 companies had better weighted WACCs than Royal Mail. That would be United Utilities with a lower WACC of 4.23%, and the other one was the National Grid, as I said before, with a 4.11%. Now, this question wanted for us to explain is there's a way that this WACCs for other firms are useful to Hillary Hunt and their whole analysis about Royal Mail. The first thing we could say regarding that issue would be that WACCs are usually a measure of how much return you need in order to accept the project. So usually WACCs are used by outsider investors when making decisions. So generally, the first thing that you could expect is that other WACCs from different companies are not as useful, but in reality these have a use. So we decided to say yes, these estimates can be useful for Hillary Hunt in different ways. And the first one, let's remember that one of the goals of the meeting that was going on in 2015 where Hillary Hunt had to be was to move from a market-based to a market-based decision making weight of 2 things instead of the government based. And the other thing was to realize if it was profitable for a company to move from a governmental regulated standpoint to a more free and privatized one when they can make their own decisions. By comparing Royal's WACC to competitors and other individuals in the market, um, we can, or Royal or their analysts and investors can realize if the government-based decisions were made them better off in comparison to the privatized ones they're doing now. How they've this changed by looking at the different companies' work and their perspective and their way to do business. We can realize what they're doing, what they're doing different, and how they're being more profitable, and how they're having different cost of debt or weight of debt or weight of equity and so on. It is also useful from an investor's point of view. Let's remember that WACC is used in the decision-making process, deciding where to invest. As I said before, remember that WACC is the discount rate when deriving net present value. It's a hurdle rate in an ROIC performance, and it's important value. It's even used when the determining the EVA, the economic value added, and many other aspects. So different WACCs are useful to see how is a Royal performing, where they have to change, and so on. Now for question 5, what are some of the best practice principles to remember when estimating corporate cost of capital? We weren't really sure how to approach these questions at first, but we decided to focus on the mistakes made by Carl Brooks while they were estimating their WACC or different WACCs, because the thing we have to realize is that a single error or using the wrong calculation or the wrong estimate and including it in the WACC calculation can give us a totally different number, or not so totally different, but it can really make an impact and change the estimation. For example, in our calculations, the difference between the WACC that Carl Brooks calculated and our WACC had a difference of more than 1%, and even though that doesn't sound like much, in reality it is a lot, since this rate can move really easy. So let's see to these errors committed by Carl Brooks when estimating this. The first big error we realized was the cost of debt used by Carl Brooks and how they calculate it. It is misleading because the only thing that it's taking into account is the average yield provided by bonds of the same rating of other companies, and there is no attention given by the yield to maturity for bonds issued by the same company, by Royal Mail. Usually what companies do is take an average of these two, so we can go to a middle point. By doing this, there might be we could get some difference in the WACC. As we saw, the value was different for ours, and it changed. It had a slight change. The second difference we realized was regarded weight of debt and weight of equity. For these calculations, the market value of equity used by Carl Brooks was the book value of equity, which is not the same. Usually the market value of equity is lower than the book value of equity. Usually this is a ratio, the book value of equity, that tends to determine if a company believes that they're being undervalued or overvalued. Usually these are going to have a better estimate or higher rates compared to the value, the market value of equity, so it can be misleading. So if at some point a company it's being overvalued, but internally overvalued and believed to be overvalued, their real rate's not gonna be easy to determine. So if you use the book value of equity in a company in the calculation of weight of debt and weight of equity, while in the other one you're using the market value of equity, it's not gonna be even comparable. It's gonna be really misleading, and this was a mistake committed here. We recalculated all that to calculate our market value of equity. We did the calculation of shares, number of shares outstanding, and the share price the realistic way to do it. So yeah, it has some differences and it has a really large impact. There are other factors that we mentioned in our essay about that can have a difference or can be played or could be really important when calculating WACC. A really important factor is using an accurate tax rate, since by not using a correct one or having different tax rates when calculating different WACCs, it's not gonna be, we're gonna have differences just by not using the same tax rate. Another really important principle is the capital asset pricing model, the CAPM, that it's used in order to calculate cost of equity. So knowing these principles and models, it's really important. We can say, concluding, that even though that those mistakes made by Carl Brooks might seem minor and might not have a really large impact, in reality that's wrong. I mean, they actually change, as I said before, the WACC value for more than 1%, which in reality it's a big gap of difference. So we would say that paying attention to every detail and using the correct margins, the correct values, are the best practices in order to calculate the corporate cost of capital of the company. Thank you for listening.